Daniel Sports Central, we go over our 2022 college football predictions for the South Carolina Gamecocks, team that went 7-6 overall in the 2021 season. By all this team being 2022 and whether or not South Carolina can be a potential SEC contender in the 2022 season is we'll be over here today. We'll be analyzing this team and predicting their schedule game by game in this video. Starting out with their team trends, South Carolina 7-6 last season. They were 3-3 in their first 6 games, 4-3 in their last 7, so not a bad season for this team. They were, obviously, this is a step in the right direction for South Carolina, considering this team has been a bottom feeder in the SEC for multiple seasons in recent history. But this team is definitely going in the right direction as we head into 2022. They lost to Georgia 13-40. That was in week 3. Obviously, Georgia was the eventual national champions, so they were a really good team last season. Lost to Kentucky by 6, 10-16. That was one of those tough losses here. This team took a couple of really tough, close losses. You flip those to wins. This is a 9 or 10 win football team this season. They beat Florida 40-17. They lost to Missouri 28-31. They beat Auburn 21-17 and beat North Carolina in the Mayo Bowl 38-21. So that was a huge win to finish out the season. But considering this team lost to Clemson 30-0 in the last game of the regular season, it didn't look like this team, and it looked like they were going to come out flat in the Mayo Bowl, considering they just had a terrible last game there to Clemson. But in the end, finished out the season strong with a win against North Carolina. Looking forward to 2022. Now, your roster preview going to next season, and this team obviously has got a couple of big changes going into next season, and a couple of them are major. You got Spencer Rattler coming in, most notably the Oklahoma transfer quarterback, who, heading into 2021, Spencer Rattler was expected to be one of the best quarterbacks in the nation. 2020 was a great season for him, and going into 2021, the sky was the limit. He did disappoint just a bit, and of course, having Caleb Williams in there with him in Oklahoma made a difference, because, Caleb Williams got some playing time, and turns out Williams was the better quarterback at times, but Spencer Rattler was not far behind. He is a really good quarterback who certainly shows tremendous potential. And so now going into 2022, it's a little bit different than it was going into 2021. He was talked about as one of, if not the best quarterback going into 2021 for Oklahoma. And it's not quite the same story going into 2022, but he certainly is a quarterback that I think has some tremendous talent and definitely a lot of potential going into next season. So keep an eye on him. For sure going into next season. You also got Luke Doty coming back, your starting quarterback, where you could say your primary quarterback from last season. There were 3 quarterbacks who split time last year. Luke Doty, Jason Brown, and Zeb Noland. And Luke Doty, most notably, is coming back. But Spencer Rattler, far and away, it is pretty obvious he's going to be the starting quarterback for this team next season. If not, I would be super surprised, and that would just really show how far Spencer Rattler fell in a couple of years. The backfield, you do lose Kevin Harris and Zaquandre White. So you lose your top 2 in the backfield, which is obviously not ideal. Even though there is some depth in the running back position, so I'm not too terribly concerned. But Harris put up over 700 yards, and White put up over 700 as well. So they combined for over 1,500 total yards of offense and 9 touchdowns last season. And the receiving core, you got Josh Vann coming back, Jaheim Bell coming back. So you do return your top 2 in the receiving core, which is huge. If you look at them from last season, Vann put up over 700 yards of offense and 5 touchdowns. And, of course, Jaheim Bell put up over 500 yards and 5 touchdowns last year. So them two combined nearly for 1,300 yards last season. So not a bad season for both of them. And Nick Muse, you do lose him. He was your 3rd in receiving from last season. And you also lose 2 on the defensive line, 3 linebackers, and 2 in the secondary. So defensively, that is really where I see a concern there, is because you're losing a lot of your key players, especially in the linebacking core. You lose 3 of your starters from last season. So, there are a couple of key losses here for South Carolina going into next season, especially defensively. But the offense, I'm pretty confident, looks pretty good going into next season. I think this offense is going to excel here. Spencer Rattler, of course, plus you got the receiving core that looks pretty good. You also got, I think, Austin Stogner coming in too, who was Spencer Rattler's former teammate. So that's going to be huge for him to have another target there. But once again, the defense is my main concern going to next season, whether or not the defense can hold up. The SEC is just a brutal conference. And, any team can be good at any moment, but, it's obviously tough when you got Georgia and Alabama just running the show all the time. But South Carolina, this is a team that defensively they were good at times, but they were bad at times as well. I mean, inconsistency was a big thing for this team last year. They'd have one really good game, and then the next game they'd just look absolutely terrible. And so that defense will need to step up and have a good season if this team wants any chance of being an SEC contender in 2022. But now for your transfer portal and recruiting going to next season, Austin Stogner's coming in, tight end from Oklahoma, which is huge. Obviously, he was Spencer Rattler's former teammate. Devontae Reed, safety's coming in from Central Michigan. Antoine Wells, receiver, coming in from James Madison. You do lose Jamar Brown, linebacker, to Coastal Carolina, so another loss in the linebacking core. Dominic Hill, defensive backs off the Temple, but you do bring in Christian Beal, running back from Wake Forest, who could definitely have an impact, and Lavasay Carroll, running back from Georgia. So the running back position does add a couple. Of course, you got the receiver coming in, Wells, and you also bring in, or you lose Colby Fields, linebacker, to LSU, another linebacker. So in this defense, there are multiple holes defensively, but the offense I'm really not too concerned about. 24th in the nation in recruiting, 10th in the SEC. You got 7 4-stars and 15 3-stars coming in for next season, so recruiting not all that bad. But that said, let's look at your schedule now going into next season. Obviously, you got Georgia State in week 1, followed by Arkansas in week 2. So your September, weeks 2 and 3, you got 2 pretty tough matchups. You got Arkansas on the road and then Georgia at home in week 3. Charlotte to finish out your September. And then in October, you got South Carolina State, SC State there on October 1st. Kentucky on the road, Texas A&M at home, Missouri at home. And then in November, you got 3 of your last 4 games on the road. Vanderbilt, Florida on the road, Tennessee at home, and then Clemson on the road to finish out your season. So as it usually is for South Carolina, this is once again just another brutal schedule. You got Clemson to finish out your season, as you always do. Clemson is always one of South Carolina's non-conference games. Plus just a brutal SEC schedule. You got to play Texas A&M and Arkansas as your 2 crossover games into the West Division, and Texas A&M and Arkansas are my 2 of my top 3 projected for the SEC West going into next season. So it's a tough schedule once again for South Carolina. This team just does not get much of a break when it comes to schedule. Even your September is kind of weird because you play Georgia State as your first game, which is pretty normal. That's a good way to start the season. And then you got Arkansas and Georgia, 2 brutal SEC conference games. And then you got Charlotte and SC State, 2 of your non-conference games there in week 4 and week 5. So kind of a weird schedule for this team. But that said, look at September, your Georgia State. I will say that's an easy win. You knock off them. But you do lose to Arkansas and Georgia. Arkansas going into next season, I do think, is once again a big SEC contender. They were kind of a surprise team in 2021. I don't really expect it to be that way going into 2022. I could see them in that 8 to 9 win range going into next year. Then you got Georgia, potential. They could be in the college football playoff once again easily, and potentially win another national title. They're returning a lot of their key players. They're losing a few, but the recruiting's great. Their depth is great going to next season. Georgia's once again going to be a really good team. So you lose to them. You beat Charlotte by a couple of touchdowns there, so you're 2-2 heading into October. You got SC State, easy win. Then you lose to Kentucky and Texas A&M. Obviously, Kentucky going to next season, I do expect to be towards the top of that East Division, probably 9 to 10 wins. So you lose to them. You lose to Texas A&M as well. The Aggies, really good team going to next season. They'll be a national contender, I really do think. So, once again, just a tough schedule. You lose those 2, but you beat Missouri to finish out your October there in a close one. So you're 4-4 heading into November. You got Vanderbilt on the road. You take care of them by a few touchdowns. You beat Florida. You beat Tennessee. So you get a couple of nice wins there in November against Florida and Tennessee. Tennessee could be good next year. But you lose to Clemson on the road to finish out your season. Clemson is, as I mentioned before, once again, going to be, I do think, a big ACC contender, potential national contender going into next season. So Clemson, I do have you losing to them. But 7-5 is the record for next season. So, it may be a bit underwhelming in comparison to some predictions, but I do think South Carolina, if you can get up to 7 or 8 wins, especially with a schedule like this, I'd say you're in good shape heading into bowl season, which if you can get to a pretty good bowl game, you win that. I'd say that's a pretty good season for South Carolina. and a 7 or 8 win season, which I think is very much reasonable for this team. Yeah, that should do it for them. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below on South Carolina. I appreciate you guys watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.